What single event in history do you think changed the world the most? Invention of the printing press. It allowed the proliferation and spread of ideas at an exponentially higher rate, and it allowed books to become something the masses could afford. The Enlightenment, and by extension the modern world, never could have happened without it. It represented as big of an information revolution as the internet does today. I think when some decided, hey, why don't we just take these plants we're foraging for and plant them near our huts? That way we can just walk outside and get food rather than walk around looking for it. Discovering electricity, we'd still be using letters for communication. Construction tools wouldn't allow us to build any structure more than 10 or so stories. Spark is a key part of an internal combustion engine. So no cars unless you had a steam engine. If the Ming Emperor hadn't ushered in a policy of isolation in 1433, and Zheng He, who would die shortly after, and his fleet, the largest in the world at the time, had been able to continue exploring, then the world as we know it would be significantly different, as China was the superpower of the 15th century and it just shut its door on the world. We don't have much detail about the ships in that fleet, but the accounts of Ibn Battuta and Marco Polo make them sound like incredible engineering accomplishments for the time. Vasily Arkhypov's decision to not fire nuclear torpedoes at American submarines. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, Arkhypov was one of the 3 commanders on board his nuclear submarine. In order to use the sub's nuclear weapons, all 3 members had to vote unanimously. Arkhypov's submarine had not received word from Moscow, and U.S. ships were dropping depth charges on their submarine, trying to get it to surface, thinking nuclear war had already broken out. The submarine commanders thought the charges being dropped were intended to sink the sub, and firing on them would be defensive. When it came to a vote, Arkhypov refused to give approval for use of the nuclear weapons, and the sub surfaced. Had he caved to the wills of the other 2 commanders on the ship, the world would have fell into WWIII. The Black Plague killed a massive amount of Europeans, changing the course of human history and culture, religion, medicine, etc. Hard to say if all those people survived. What family lines would have stayed and produced world-changing offspring? Another planet hitting the Earth when it was forming. Without that, the Earth wouldn't have enough mass to maintain a dense enough atmosphere to support complex life like Mars, and there would also be no moon. Discovery of fire. Cooked food freed up many hours in the day for other pursuits. The Norman conquest of England in 1066 has to be up there. It set into motion the rise of the British Empire, which shaped the modern world. It might not be the biggest one, but the invention of the Haber process for nitrogen fixation is definitely up there. It's what allowed for the production of artificial fertilizers on an industrial scale, which was a huge contributor to the massive spike in world population in the 20th century. And, quite literally, billions of us would starve if it suddenly disappeared today. The invention of vaccination. Just the fact that I am immune to various diseases that took millions of lives a century or 2 ago amazes me. The Columbian Exchange, so many cultures and species mixed. For instance, earthworms didn't exist on North or South America before. And that completely changes the plant and wildlife composition. And that's only one of many changes worldwide. Diets changed. Europe was introduced to tomatoes, potatoes, tobacco, chocolate, the fall of the Inca and Aztecs, as well as the wipeout of countless other natives. I'm surprised I haven't seen it mentioned yet. I've seen several historians argue it was the most significant event to happen to the planet since the death of the dinosaurs. Vaccines. Specifically the smallpox vaccine, polio vaccine, flu vaccines and measles vaccines. Stanislav Petrov, acting on his belief that the inbound American missiles weren't real because there were so few, and not firing missiles back. If he did, WW3 would have broke out. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, a Soviet submarine found itself surrounded by American destroyers and dove to avoid being detected. They lost contact with Moscow due to the dive and did not hear anything for a number of days. An American ship started to drop some practice depth charges which the sub believed were real depth charges. 2 of the 3 senior officers believed that war must have started and decided to launch a nuclear-tipped torpedo. Luckily, unanimous agreement between the 3 senior officers is needed, and the 3rd refused to agree, realizing that they may have not been actual depth charges. He calmed the captain and convinced him to surface to re-establish contact. If it was launched, it was very likely that it would have resulted in a global thermonuclear war. If not for this third man, it would be a very different world we live in today. I think it's yet to be determined. But here are some highlights and lowlights. Invention of the printing press, invention of agriculture, Black Plague, atomic bombs dropped in Japan, discovery of antiseptic techniques, antibiotics. Will COVID and/or other current events make the list? I really fear that in 100 years it's going to be 2016, the election of the current POTUS. The number one event, no question, was Kai Lun's invention of cheap, durable, and easily produced paper. Various similar materials existed before, such as papyrus, but lacked at least one of the aforementioned characteristics. The ability to store and transfer information on such a massive scale literally changed the world. Columbus setting up the beginnings of European colonies in America was also massively world-changing. Not necessarily always in a good way, mind you, but definitely a dramatic change. And the introduction of Christianity, Islam, Buddhism, and Confucianism all deserve a spot on the list. Other religions and philosophies grew and evolved over time. But those four in particular have a clear starting point, brought on by a specific person. Not sure if it's classified as a single event. But the late Bronze Age collapse of civilization undoubtedly set the world back hundreds of years of knowledge. To think where we would be today if those civilizations didn't fade from existence. Conquest of Constantinople, Istanbul. Scientists migrated to Rome and took the ancient Roman books with them. Europeans started to explore the world to find new trade routes since Ottomans controlled the Silk Road. They came back with gold and silver and spent it on scientific research and art. This led to the start of the Renaissance. The knowledge from the Renaissance led to the era of Enlightenment. These changed people's looks at human rights and led to the French Revolution and nationalism. Industrial revolution started in England and spread to Europe. Factories needed more resources than before, so slavery started. Germany and Italy were late to create an empire, so they wanted allies as colonies. WW1 Germany lost and was humiliated and wanted revenge. WW2 I know I sound like History Channel at 2 a.m. The destruction of the Library of Alexandria. Who knows where we would be knowledge-wise if that hadn't happened. As a Brit. The American Mutiny. Without that we could have won both world wars. As an afterthought we could all share Boris Johnson. A trouble shared is a trouble halved. The creation of humanity. That event led to everything else. If humans had not evolved to be human-ish, we wouldn't have anything. For all we know, small lizards and geckos would have developed to be the superior species. We only evolved faster. Technically prehistory. But the Great Oxidation Event. About 2.4 billion years ago. Organisms in the ocean began to use photosynthesis more efficiently and began releasing large amounts of oxygen into the atmosphere, causing an extinction event that killed 99% of life on Earth at the time. But also paved the way for multi-celled organisms to evolve and eventually lead to the world we have today. Birth of Christ and rise of Christianity. It left an indelible mark on Western culture. We even date things based around this event. What was believed to be was science fiction 30 years ago is now part of our daily lives thanks to the internet. We have all of humanity's knowledge at our fingertips. And carry a computer in our pockets more powerful than those we used to send people to the moon. The scary thing is that we still don't know if the internet will ultimately change the world for better or worse. The birth of Michael Faraday. Maybe not the most world-changing event. But I have to put it here. Look around the room you're in right now. Everything that's there, including you, is somewhat a result of his work in electricity. I am a bit biased. But I would say Faraday's motor is in the top 5. I agree with the printing press guy, but I think the internet has had a bigger effect on the world. It's not just news. It's also data. Not history. But the last 3 decades. The Iraq War caused the Arab Spring. Syrian civil war. Refugees into Europe. Rise of the far right in Europe and the US. Internet creation. Now people can get information from all around the world. Also have contact with another foreigner people. Knowing culture. Learning languages. All of that without leaving their home. The discovery of making fire. A bunch of less hairy apes figure out how to hurt each other and their prey more efficiently. So they start looking for what else they can do better than nature intended. And then it all snowballs into the world we live in today. A world where humans rule by a wide margin. What a great job we've done with ruling it, by the way.